Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm here to give you the perspective on the life of a domestic cat in ancient Egypt. My whole life, I've believed that cats in ancient Egypt were worshipped. This exaggeration of the truth is why I'm making this video today, to tell you the truth about the life of a domestic cat in ancient Egypt as it really was. But before we go through the day by day, I want to actually show how we got there and why they were treated the way they were. So, about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, humans began farming grains like barley and wheat. This, of course, attracted rodents, and along with rodents came the African wildcat. The African wildcat was larger than modern house cats. It also had large ears, slender bodies, and short ticked coats, which would have striped or spotted tabby markings. Over time, this became a mutually beneficial relationships because humans got safety with food storage protection and cats got an easy meal. They even started leaving food out for the cats to attract them to the settlements. And because they got easy access to food and they found the settlements were actually safer than the wild, cats actually went through self-domestication. So while they chose to live closer to humans, they ended up developing more docile temperaments and various coat colors. By the Middle Kingdom, 2000 BCE, cats were appearing in art as pets, hunting companions, and symbols of protection. Now, how did cats get associated with the divine? And this boils down to Bastet. Bastet is the ancient Egyptian goddess of motherhood, fertility, music, and joy. Her image used to reflect a lioness. The most well-known lioness goddess was Sekhmet, and she was a symbol of power and war. She actually only calmed down if you fed her blood. So over time, the ancient Egyptians, particularly the common people, felt that they needed a more motherly version. Cats were known as great mothers, so while Sekhmet remained this super powerful warrior, Bastet was seen to soften in her image. With this, her popularity soared among women and children, and this really made her the people's goddess and not a king's. She became their defender against evil spirits, plagues, and disease. And soon observations were made that cats actually had similar features to Bastet, and they actually ended up being seen as living emissaries for the people, a symbol of protection. They were both graceful and affectionate, they were fierce and provoked, and they seemed to both protect against any kind of danger or disease. Cats would get rid of things like rodents, venomous snakes, and scorpions, which had a lot of great value. Bastet was also associated with moonlight, and cats had a form of night vision. If you ever had a cat, you'll know that they have an air of mystery about them, and it was easy to infer with this air of mystery how it would easily be interpreted as seeming like divine secrets when thinking of Bastet. So Bastet, being protector of the hearth, was believed to empower cats to protect households. They became living symbols of Bastet's blessing and sacred animals to be revered. So before we get into the cats, I want to tell you a few more things about Bastet because I find it really cool and interesting. But her main temple was located in Bubastis, and this was along the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta, of course, was a very lush, fertile area, and this is where you would find the cats, all down the Nile Delta, because wherever there was water, there was an agriculturally rich area, which of course brought rodents and then brought cats. And in Bubastis, which translates into House of Bastet, they had massive temples, sacred lakes, and processions. One of these processions being the annual festival of Bastet, which actually coincided with the annual flooding. And this flooding in Egypt symbolized the renewal of life, and so people wanted to celebrate that. So these devotees of all classes would travel by boat to Bubastis. These boats would be decorated with paintings of flowers, cats, and Bastet. There would be people playing all kinds of instruments like harps, flutes, drums. The sistrum, it's like a ceremonial rattle, and it was something that Bastet was frequently seen holding. So along with all of these boats and all of this music, you would also have people dancing, and it was just this must have been this crazy scene to witness. Herodotus, which is someone that had witnessed this festival, actually estimated that he thought there was about 700,000 people there. While I don't know how he got his exact number, it had to be just an insanely massive amount of people for him to even try to guess that number. And all of this music was thought to please Bastet and actually invoke protection from her. While she was a main symbol of motherhood, you did have men and women alike attend this festival because she was also a protector, and men can resonate with that. So you would have this loud and joyful festival with people dancing, they'd be drinking a ton of wine, and Bubastis would become incredibly packed, and you'd have sacred cats just roaming around for devotees to express their prayers or offer any kind of offerings. These devotees offered things like food, wine, and incense to the goddess, and cats were sometimes offered special treats. Herodotus was quoted saying, "I have never seen a festival so popular or so joyful anywhere else in Egypt." Ramses IV even declared no lions could be hunted during this festival. I know that may seem strange because you might think cats being worshipped wouldn't be hunted, but these weren't seen as the cats of Bastet. These were dangerous lions, often associated with Sekhmet, and killing one of them actually gave the person this air of power and control about them. So if a pharaoh actually killed a lion, they were seen as being able to control Ma'at, or the cosmic order, and that was seen as something really important to the people because it meant he was able to fulfill his duty as a pharaoh. While it is sad to think of hunting lions, they were wild and dangerous, and they could attack livestock and actually intrude on the Egyptian settlements where there was a lot of people. So it was important for the pharaohs to show the people they could actually control this danger. But on the festival of Bastet, you could not do that. I wonder if there was any incidents because of that, like just a lion coming by during the festival time. I can't imagine how that might have gone. I'm very curious. But other than these massive temples and festivals in Bubastis, you also had massive cat cemeteries. These temples and towns were built around the reverence of cats, and therefore, when a cat passed away, they would also honor them. And therefore, they had all these necropolises for cats. And then when the Bubastis became the royal residence in the 22nd dynasty, that actually made it the de facto capital, even though it wasn't quite seen as the actual capital still, because you had to have the heart of Egypt where the sun gods were, which is where the desert area was, and you had gods like Ra. Now, these were seen as the main gods. So at the time, she was just a regional goddess. This dynasty promoted her to a national goddess, but it still didn't give her the same attention of gods and goddesses in Upper Egypt like Sekhmet would have. And cats being so sacred, it was actually forbidden to export them, which I think is pretty interesting because it's something I never really thought about. So there was legal protections about cats being exported to other lands. You had Egyptian naval officers and inspectors assigned to intercepting cat smugglers. And it was actually documented by a visiting source that Egyptian agents were sent to retrieve them. I absolutely love that. The thought of the cats being so sacred to their land that you just could not take them out of it, that's just really interesting to me. So while Upper Egypt obviously didn't give Bastet the attention that Bastet deserved, Lower Egypt certainly did. So now I'm going to go into Lower Egypt and how they viewed cats. I'm going to split the cats into temple cats with a subsection for colony cats because they're also temple cats. And then I'm going to go into house cats and street cats because these cats are all treated differently. And while they were all looked upon as something to be protected and respected, they weren't all treated the same. And I think it's important to make that distinction, especially because I want to show you what it was like for a day in the life of these cats. And I'm actually going to be reading a little excerpts to you where you kind of imagine yourself as the cat and living that day. But first we have temple cats. Temple cats were seen as sacred and semi-divine. Naturally, these cats lived at temples, especially in Bubastis, and they were associated with the goddess directly. They were seen as actual living embodiments of her, like a piece of her spirit within them. These temples actually employed priests and caretakers that were actually responsible for the cat's care. They were even adorned with jewelry such as collars, amulets, sometimes bracelets, earrings, and they were allowed to roam freely around the temple. So often you would have people coming there for worship, and these worshippers would actually give them attention and blessings. And they could also offer them food, which was all seen to show as a sign of devotion to Bastet. And if you had enough money, you actually could donate funds to a specific cat, and this was seen as an act of piety or to gain extra divine favor. These temple cats were also allowed to hunt, so in my mind, when you're this prestigious cat, you might not be allowed to do things like that, like get your hands dirty, But because it was in the cat's nature, it was something that was gifted to the people by Bastet. And so the idea of suppressing that was just non existent. They were completely allowed to hunt. They actually protected the temple. They would hunt venomous snakes that would threaten either the priests or the temple visitors. And they were known to kill scorpions, which of course kept the temple safe for humans and other sacred animals. Now, harming these cats was seen as blasphemous. It was a religious offense and seen as an attack on Bastet and the divine order. If you hurt one of these cats, you could throw off the cosmic order and essentially bring things from bad luck to diseases or plagues. And because this divine punishment was so feared, any harm brought to one of these cats would result in capital punishment. So during my research, I thought about what exactly would qualify a cat to become a temple cat, and they did look at quite a few things. The first being appearance. Cats were chosen if they reflected the goddess's imagery. They wanted them graceful, with gold or tawny coats, especially in the earlier times with Sekhmet because of her particular lioness colors. So darker colors later were more revered, but at the beginning this particular gold coat color was seen as in divine favor. Then there were certain eye colors like copper, green, or gold, and if you were poised and symmetrical. Temperament was also important. You had to be calm around humans if you were going to be a temple cat because you would be around them all day, every day. And a skittish cat would not suit temple life. A priest needed to be able to handle this cat for rituals, and they needed to be shown to visitors without panic. And when it really boils down to it, docile cats are much easier to breed. They would also look for symbolic birth signs, such as if you were born on the festival of Bastet, which could have been seen as auspicious. Unique markings, like maybe a particular patch of white, might have been interpreted as a divine symbol. Also, there was your lineage. If your mother and father were temple cats before you, it was more likely that you would become a temple cat as well, because you were seen as coming from proven divine lines. And lastly, they would look at your health and physical condition. Priests wanted you healthy, physically fit, free from any disease or injuries, because all of these things were seen as divine displeasure. So a healthy coat and bright eyes were seen as a divine gift from the goddess. This physical perfection was a reflection of God's presence, and this was a consistency they would have among all animals. They all had this standard. So how would a temple go about acquiring these cats? Well, we did already talk about lineage. So the temples themselves did have breeding colonies there, or cat farms. So you had major temples like Bubastis and at Saqqara, which would have all of these cats being bred in the colonies. This did not mean all cats from colonies would actually go and become temple cats, because this was reserved for the elite few. And actually the majority of these colony cats would be considered offerings later in life. So other than if you were a spiritual descendant, you could have also come from a wealthy family. So you had these families that would breed cats, and they would have either a particular kitten or cat that had some traits that were quite unique, and they thought that the temple might be interested in. And the temple would take these cats and they would either, again, assign them as a temple cat or into the offering system. Actually, offering cats to the temple was considered a pious act, much like dedicating food or gold to the temple. Priests and temple workers would also sometimes try to trap wildcats, which is pretty crazy, but probably seen as much more standard practice. Of course, they would look for the calmer, less aggressive ones, and after getting cats, they would determine which were the best of the best, of course, and it was easier to take in kittens because they're much more capable of being tamed. Then by the New Kingdom, Egypt had contacts with Nubia, the Levant, and Cyprus, in which they would bring cats to them as exotic gifts. And usually these cats would have had things like distinctive coat colors or sizes that priests would have valued. So another place would be at the Festival of Bubastis. There was two things that happened at this festival. You could either bring a cat as an offering to the temple, which again would go to temple service or be mummified as an offering, and there were those that actually purchased kittens from the temples to take home with them. But we'll get into more of that when we talk about house cats. So now I want to get into the lifespan of a temple cat. And this really depended on its role and the time in history, and whether it was dedicated for a temple service or a ritual sacrifice. First, you had high status living representatives of Bastet that would live in the temple, those that were used in ceremonies, kept in the inner temple precincts, and they were allowed to live out their full natural life within the temple, which was about 12 to 15 years. Then you had your breeder cat from a colony. They lived about typically 5 to 10 years. They were also seen as sacred cats because these cats were still the best of the best. They're providing all of these sacred cats for the temple. These cats were usually allowed to live out their natural life unless they became susceptible to some kind of disease or injury, and then it was seen as the right thing to do to ritually sacrifice them in order to preserve them in purity, and this was considered a sacred act. And they felt they were doing the right thing for that particular cat, because it was actually desired to go to the afterlife in purity. So in the colony, you also had your offering kittens. So these aren't the temple cats, they're not the main breeder cats in the colony, they are the babies, the kittens. And they typically survived about 3 months to 2 years. And that makes me really sad. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the death of a cat in ancient Egypt and what that entailed, and I'm going to go in a lot more detail into what happened to those offering cats. And it's not something I want to touch on in this video because this video is a celebration of the life of a cat in ancient Egypt, and I thought it'd be appropriate to make them two separate videos in order to keep the darker part on its own. So now I'm going to get to the part where I want you to imagine what it was like for the day in the life of a temple cat. And if you so choose to, you can close your eyes at this point. The first rays of the sun strike that polished limestone wall of Bastet's temple. You, a sleek golden-eyed cat, open your eyes from your bed of soft linen inside the temple's inner courtyard. You are not a house pet. You are Bastet's living representative. Born from a long line of temple cats, your fur is brushed by an attendant priestess each morning, and a protective amulet, perhaps in the shape of an eye, hangs from your beaded collar around your neck. Your breakfast is prepared by temple servants, fresh fish from the Nile, a little goat's milk, and scraps from the temple kitchen. A low stone dish is set out for you and other high-status temple cats. While you eat, the smell of burning incense from the morning rituals drifts across the courtyard. As worshippers enter the temple to give offerings to Bastet, you sit calmly in a sunlit alcove near a statue of the goddess. Your posture is poised and dignified. Some pilgrims bow slightly as they pass you, believing Bastet's spirit can speak through your eyes. A priestess occasionally lifts you gently, presenting you to a wealthy patron who has brought a gold pendant as an offering. Behind the main temple lies a walled garden filled with sycamore figs, papyrus pools, and shrines. You roam here with a small group of other temple cats, hunting lizards or birds that wander too close. The garden is safe and enclosed. You are both predator and protector in this space. If it is a feast day for Bastet, musicians play sistrums and drums, and pilgrims gather in the temple square. Priests carry your image painted on a wooden panel in procession. You might walk among the worshippers, accepting gentle touches and murmured prayers. Sometimes, kittens from the temple's breeding colony are brought out for pilgrims to adopt as blessed animals for their homes. As the day cools, you return to the inner precinct. A senior priest inspects the cats, checking for injuries or signs of illness. Sacred animals must be kept healthy and unblemished. You curl into a sleeping place in the warm shadow of a statue of Bastet, the scent of lotus flowers and oil lamps in the air. Now, as you know, in the temple, there were not just the temple cats, but also the breeding colony cats. So I do want to do a similar kind of story like that for them as well. So if you're ready, you can close your eyes and imagine. A day in the life as a breeding colony cat. The first light of Ra creeps over the walls of the temple, and I wake to a chorus of many voices, dozens of us stretching, grooming, yawning in unison. The air smells of warm sand and sweet incense drifting from the shrine of Bastet. I am not alone here. I never am. My sisters and brothers tumble together, and the priestesses walk among us, placing bowls filled with milk and scraps of fish. I eat quickly, then lick my whiskers clean. I am chosen. The priestess with the blue faience beads bends low to stroke my back. Her hand is gentle, and I know what it means. I am among those who will continue the line. Some of us are picked for beauty, some for our sleek coats, and others for strength. The humans say Bastet smiles when kittens thrive. I hear their soft words and their laughter as they watch us play. When the sun grows fierce, we retreat into cool shade near the temple wall. Kittens mewl and wrestle, some still clinging to their mothers. I rest beside them, half dozing, while pilgrims arrive. They bring offerings, flowers, bread, amulets. Some come to see us. Their eyes linger on me, on the curve of my tail, the brightness of my eyes. They whisper prayers to Bastet, thanking her for life, fertility, and protection. I do not understand all their words, but I feel their reverence. In the afternoon, we are led closer to the shrine. The air is heavy with music, sistra rattling, women singing to the goddess. Some of us are adorned with collars of colored beads. A young boy touches my ear gently. His mother places coins into the priest's hand. I hear my name spoken, offered to Bastet. Perhaps one day I will live among the sacred cats inside the inner temple, or perhaps my children will. As the sun sets, bowls return filled with food. We gather, tails weaving, purrs rising like a hymn. The priests smile, our presence is a blessing. Later, under the silver gaze of the moon, we patrol the storerooms where grain and fish are kept. Mice and snakes dare not linger long. We are many, and we are swift. When the world is quiet, I curl into a nest of woven reeds with others, my body warm against theirs. I dream of running fields, of chasing prey, of sitting beside the great goddess whose eyes shine like mine. I am not a stray, not merely a hunter. I am Bastet's own, guardian, mother, offering, blessing. Tomorrow will come with the same rhythm, and I will walk it proudly, for here in the colony, every paw step is sacred. So now I want to get into house cats. These cats were not considered semi-divine like the temple cats, but they were revered and protected. You can often find them depicted in tomb paintings sitting under the chair of their owner, which symbolized the protection of home. They lived in households, and this included the wealthy and the common. Now, we don't know a lot about the common folk and their cats, and a lot of times when people talk about house cats in ancient Egypt, they say they were mainly kept by the wealthy. Now, these pampered lap cats, while they were the ones you would hear about most, it's because tombs were built for the elite. And everyday life among the common people was lost unless it was preserved accidentally. Places like Bubastis, where it was high in humidity, papyrus will only survive a few hundred years, and even in drier conditions, it's just a few thousand. So, unless you actually had something painted on a temple, which again was reserved for the elite, the everyday nuances of life often go unreported. So, I would venture to say cats were common in households, even modest ones. Now, a lot of elite homes, of course, they could afford things like statues and amulets of cats. In paintings, you would see them under noble chairs, in marshes hunting, or in offering scenes. The pharaohs themselves owning a cat was considered rare because, again, they looked more to Sekhmet instead of Bastet because Sekhmet was seen as more powerful. And so Bastet was only something that maybe the wives would pray to for fertility and motherhood blessings. So while pharaohs themselves may not have had cats as pets, their children certainly did. They've actually appeared in palace tomb art and religious ceremonies, which suggests that they were common in royal surroundings. These cats were seen as protectors and companions. Now, it's also said that people in ancient Egypt did not name their cats. And I find this funny because while it might not have been as common, let's say, for an elite household to name their cat, they would often just call their cats Mew. Dogs were reserved to have names, but cats, because they were a symbol of divinity, weren't always named because they were just seen as an extension of Bastet. Now, I would definitely wager among common households that they definitely name their cats because I don't know about you, but even the thought of getting a cat, I think about naming a cat. So I feel like While they may have been seen as protectors, they were also seen as companions, and I feel like it does make sense to name them. And there have been, in some elite situations, where they did find collars with names on them. And some of these names include things like Najim, which means sweet, or a term of endearment. Then you have Najimet, which is a sweet female. Then you had Tamit, which is a very affectionate way of calling a cat kitty or sweet girl. Then you had Mew or Tamu, which is she cat. So while naming a cat was less common and less documented, it is a myth to say cats were not named in ancient Egypt. Now, along with collars, elite households would sometimes have their cats wearing gold jewelry or earrings. They would also get small figurines like miniature rodents, birds, or fish shaped items. They were either carved from wood, ivory, or clay. This allowed the cats to hunt and stalk something when natural prey was not around. They also got things like string and ribbon. These strips of linen or papyrus fibers were dragged or dangled to engage a cat's attention and exercise their hunting instincts. They also got things like feathers, leaves, and small sticks, and they often received interactive play with humans. Temple cats, on the other hand, didn't always receive the typical house cat toys. If they received toys, they were things that had more spiritual and divine meaning, like figurines or amulets that could be linked to protection or rituals. House cats were fed usually leftovers, like fish, milk, bread, or cooking scraps, and they slept indoors or in your courtyards. Like temple cats, harming them was still seen as a serious crime both legally and socially. And even an accidental harming of a cat can result in one's execution. And this execution was not something even the pharaoh could pardon. They wouldn't dare to, because this harming or killing of a cat, even though they didn't look to Bastet as much, they knew the people did, and they knew she still was an Egyptian goddess. And if you harmed one of these cats protected by her, then you were going against Ma'at, or the cosmic order, and that was just not acceptable. And in many cases, it was an immediate mob violence. And this justice was sanctioned by authorities. Herodotus, the Greek historian, was quoted saying, "If a man kills a cat, whether it be by accident or not, he is instantly seized by the crowd and put to death." So crowds were known for attacking or lynching a person for harming a cat. And foreigners were not exempt. We have an account by Diodorus Siculus that recounts a story of a Roman accidentally killing a cat. And despite the Roman government trying to intervene, the mob killed him anyway. And this really emphasized how deeply these ingrained female reverence was, even under Roman occupation. Now, we do only hear about the most dramatic of cases naturally, so everyday violations might have been quietly handled. Things such as maybe fines or temple banishment, or even a social condemnation if there wasn't a legal prosecution. Because if you killed a cat in this area, you were trash, right? You were a danger to the cosmic order. People did not want to associate with you. But also, if a cat was harmed and no one witnessed it, like today, this would go ignored because there was nothing you could do if you didn't know who did it. Now, how would one go about acquiring a house cat in ancient Egypt? So, there are definitely various ways this could have happened. So, first, like I mentioned before, you have your temples. Temples of Bastet and Sekhmet often offered cats and kittens as either gifts or sold them to trusted households. And this served two purposes. One, for the household, it brought a divine protection. And the second, for the temples, this was a way of curbing their colony populations. But having a temple cat in your home was an act of devotion on its own. And for elites, it was definitely a status symbol. And also, like I mentioned, you can get them at the temples, especially on the Festival of Bastet, where they would often have kittens ready to be purchased as a blessing. Now, you could also get your cats from friends, neighbors, or family. Once cats became common, they were obviously bred pretty easily among the people around you. And kittens were often gifted between households, especially to newlyweds or if you're moving to a new home. And this symbolized prosperity and protection in your new endeavors. You could also try capturing a semi tame cat. So you would have farmers and villagers that caught cats that may have lurked around grain silos or docks. Again, kittens were most preferable when actually capturing a wild cat. And then there were also markets. You could go to a market where an animal dealer existed, but you were going to pay a hefty price tag for this. They're going to have the most exotic looking cats there. And wealthy families could purchase this beautiful rare colored cat. And historical trade routes actually suggest that cats, or exotic cats, were imported for elite households. And another way you can get them is through inheritance. Cats were treated as a valuable possession. And when the owner died, the cat would either stay with the family or whoever the deceased mentioned in their will, or the temple itself would make an arrangement that would assign the cat to another caretaker. So now I want to read you what a day in the life was like for a house cat. The first light of the sun warms the mud brick walls of the home. You, the household cat, have been sleeping on a woven reed mat in the family's open air courtyard. Your fur is clean. Yesterday, your mistress brushed you with a palm fiber comb, removing dust from your golden tabby coat. Around your neck hangs a string of beads, a gift from the eldest daughter. The family eats bread, dates, and fish. You're given bits of dried fish and milk in a shallow pottery bowl. Sometimes you help yourself to bread. No one dare strikes you, for to harm you would risk Bastet's anger. After breakfast, you slip into the grain store. The scent of barley and emmer wheat is strong, but you are focused on the rustle in the shadows. A mouse darts. Your swift pounce ends the chase. This act not only earns you praise, but reinforces your sacred role, protector of food and family. When the sun is at its peak, you curl beneath a papyrus canopy in the courtyard. The younger children scratch your chin while their mother weaves linen. In the background, your father prepares an offering for the household shrine, where a small clay statue of Bastet watches over the family. If your master is of higher status, you may be taken on a marsh hunt. You ride in the boat, leaping onto the papyrus banks to flush out birds, sometimes catching a small fish. Hunting beside your human is a sign of mutual respect and a source of pride for the family. As the household gathers to eat, you sit beneath your mistress's chair, a scene painted in many tombs. After dinner, the eldest son scratches your ears, while his mother braids fresh beads into your collar. You are more than an animal here. You are a symbol of joy, fertility, and divine blessing. I love these. Do you like these? I think they're cool. I find the day-to-day life really fascinating. So now I want to get into street cats. These are obviously the least revered of all, but they are still protected and considered useful. They lived in homes, granaries, and farms. Their main value was in pest control, where they protected grain silos from mice, rats, and snakes. These cats were still respected, of course, legally, culturally, and spiritually. Harming one was taboo and could definitely result in public outrage. This communal protection suggested a cultural atmosphere where it was strongly discouraged to mistreat a cat. They were all seen as under the protection of Bastet, no matter their status in life. There are records of harsh punishments, even executions, for killing a street cat, regardless of your social status. Ordinary cats, while looked upon still as protectors, were also still thought to bring good luck and repel evil. They were symbolic of divine protection to the people. Now, while we know it was extremely taboo to harm a cat, this does not mean it didn't happen, because once again, street cats we wouldn't know much about, because these records were just not kept among the more common and poor rural areas. There still might have been people that resented cats for either scratching or stealing food. They could have secretly harmed cats. And it's reasonable to assume that just like today, not every case was caught, because it's just an impossible standard. And unless someone reported or witnessed it, they likely got away with it. Now, this is all really how cats were treated in Lower Egypt where the majority of cats were present and the worship of Bastet was at its highest. And all of these cats that I'm talking about, it's during the time where the worship of Bastet was at its peak. So throughout time and history, obviously these circumstances would change, but this is what it was like for a cat at the peak. Now, in Upper Egypt, as I've mentioned, it's a more desert area. They look to Sekhmet more in that area. In the south, or Upper Egypt, often remained loyal to traditional Theban religious structures and would have minimized Bastet's influence on their spiritual identity. You still had cat imagery, but it was much rarer in the temples and the tombs of Upper Egypt. You still had cat mummification, but it wasn't on this industrial scale that had happened in other areas. And the royal cults really focused on deities whose temples were actually in these state religious centers. And cats were seen in association more with Sekhmet. They were seen for more of their practical utilitarian usage. But it was still taboo to harm a cat because, once again, Bastet is still a part of the cosmic order, and as a goddess that is known for having cats under her protection, harming a cat would be harming a sacred animal, and that would violate the cosmic order. These cats were still associated in Upper Egypt with protection, fertility, and household well being, which is why you would still see queens and royal women honoring Bastet privately, especially when it came to things like fertility and childbirth. In Upper Egypt, there were also personal items found, like amulets, cosmetic jars, and jewelry, which would have depicted Bastet or cats. But even so, Bastet never became a part of the core royal cult system in Upper Egypt. So now, my thoughts. The first being, it's a shame papyrus decays so easily. The humidity in the Nile Delta, where these cat temples or Bastet temples were located, would have had so much documented data about these cats that we will never know about. And even today, modern day Bubastis, or Tel Bassa, the site of the main Bastet temple, is waterlogged. And if it wasn't destroyed a long time ago, this water would have definitely destroyed what was left. It's sad that it really solidifies the destruction of what was. There's so much we just do not know. And it really sucks that most of this information is pieced together like an incomplete puzzle. I think it's awesome we know what we know, but I really wish, being a major cat lover, that we did know more of the day to day among the common households and had more temple records available to us. There's just so very little remnants from these temples. It really sucks because it just sounds like a crazy time to be a cat in ancient Egypt. But in my next video, I'm going to be talking about what happens when a domestic cat dies in ancient Egypt. And if you're interested, please subscribe and stay tuned for next Thursday's episode of the death of a domestic cat in ancient Egypt. Thank you.